Ladies and gentlemen, good evening once again. Good evening to all of you. Once again, you are welcome here on the Ever de Consciences platform. In international news, on the sidelines of the NATO Summit, or rather, as part of the NATO Summit, NATO has decided to designate China and Russia as major threats. It's now officially confirmed. Russia and China have been formally designated as the primary and significant threats that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is currently facing. This critically important development means that NATO will undoubtedly have to prepare itself militarily and very seriously against these two formidable global powers, which for quite some considerable time now have been steadily and significantly rising in their overall strength and are now seriously and directly competing with the established transatlantic alliance. So, this significant statement made by the current NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is indeed one that truly sets the crucial tone for the increasingly complicated and potentially perilous situations the entire world may very soon face, involving a possible direct confrontation between the established NATO alliance and the emerging global South Bloc, which is primarily made up of powerful nations like China, Russia, and various other influential countries. What exactly did Mark Rutte say? And what could be the implications of such a statement coming from a NATO summit? So that's what we're going to talk about in this video conference, which I ask you to share as much as possible. Give it lots of likes, and above all, don't forget to always leave your feedback in the comments. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. Don't forget to invite your friends to subscribe. As you know, NATO considers Russia and China as rivals. These two countries, these two states are gaining power. But it's especially the case of China that worries NATO much more because they've all watched China emerge on the commercial front. China has managed to establish itself commercially, and the question of China's economic sovereignty is no longer in doubt. But what surprised the members of the alliance was seeing China position itself as a state that seriously rivals NATO. We're talking about China, a single country challenging more than 27 countries, or 27 countries. Not 27, I'm not sure. I don't know how many countries. In any case, there are a lot of them. So, if NATO, which brings together several countries, that is, the 27 European countries plus others if the member countries of NATO, are worried about two states while they themselves are numerous, you have to realize that there's something not quite right with them. The Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, during a briefing on the NATO summit in the Hague, as you know, the NATO summit is being held in the Hague. It's the last 2 days. It started on the 24th. So yesterday, Tuesday the 24th, he warned about the scale of the military capabilities that China is developing at a steady pace. He is warning all NATO member states. That means if we don't stand up, if we let China continue, China will dominate us. Even before talking about domination, China will surpass us, surpass the NATO countries. However, the goal of the NATO countries is that they consider themselves to be the most powerful countries in the world. They believe they have the strongest and most powerful army in the world, since they are really well supported. They have money and so on. But with the way China is developing its military industry, it makes them fear that China could surpass them. And what's worse is the good relationship that now exists between China and Russia. Mark Rutte points this out. He says it's not just a matter of budget or armament. It's not because China is simply equipping itself with the means to arm itself. China is increasing its budget. He says that's not it. He says, but it's an industrial logic. In just a few years, Beijing has propelled several of its companies into the leading ranks of global defense suppliers. You see, He says that in a remarkably short span of just a few years, China has effectively and strategically propelled several of its burgeoning companies into the very top tier of the most prominent and influential global defense suppliers, establishing a formidable presence in the international market. So, when you look at the world, those who supply the entire world with defense industry products, Chinese companies are at the top. So, it's not just a matter of budget and armament. Yes, China is arming itself. Yes, China has given itself a solid budget to truly equip itself with military hardware. But it goes beyond that. It's a matter of industrial logic because now China supplies other countries around the world. And China is leading in the supply of this military equipment, which means that if China is now able to supply the world, it's because China has a lot itself. And when that's the case, compared to NATO countries, it becomes complicated. So, the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, says this leap is far from insignificant. It's not simple. He says this leap reflects a strategic turning point whose repercussions obviously are not limited to the Asian region. So, here is what he states. And on the other hand, he says that Russia keeps provoking NATO on the eastern flank. The eastern flank, I was going to say, of Europe. There is provocation on that side. China is also provoking on the Taiwan side. And in terms of the military industry, China is only accelerating. They therefore come to the conclusion that China and Russia are the main threats to NATO. That means they must make Russia and China their main adversaries. A roadmap should normally be outlined to see, as much as possible, how to confront these two states. Since this last summit, NATO has been preparing for war. We don't know where it will break out, but NATO is getting ready. Unfortunately, China has not yet responded. We will see how China reacts. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that was the top story of the news. So please share it as much as possible. I'll be back with more information shortly. That was the voice of your one and only Samouraï.